Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fifth episode of the Fifth Paradigm podcast with the Patriot Review. I'm Madhav Nanda, and I'm your host, and I'm here today with my co-host, Rishita Khandelwal. Today's topic for the episode is understanding the two-front threat that India possibly faces from its two adversaries, Pakistan and China, and understanding how prepared we are to face and defend ourselves from our adversaries and their misadventures. In order to shed light on this particular topic, we have with us today a very, very distinguished guest, Lieutenant General A.K. Singh. He's here with us. And before we begin, I'd like to give you all a very short introduction of Lieutenant General A.K. Singh. Lieutenant General Singh has had a very, very illustrious career in the Indian Army over the years, and he has made immense contributions in Operation Vijay in the Kargil War of 1999 and Operation Parakram against Pakistan in 2002. Apart from that, he has been a tank commander, starting off his career as a young officer of the T-55 tanks and ending with the general officer commanding of the latest T-90 tanks. Lieutenant General Singh has also commanded the 7th Cavalry, which is a T-90 tank brigade and an armored division of the most powerful Strike 1 Corps. And he has also had the distinction of conceiving and executing some of the most complicated and some of the largest maneuvers in the recent times in two landmark exercises conducted by the forces in the country. That is the Yodha Shakti in 2010 and the exercise of Sudarshan Shakti in 2011, which displayed the might of the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force in the Thar Desert. After being conferred upon with multiple accolades from the Indian Army, he was entrusted with the responsibility of becoming the Lieutenant Governor of Andaman and Nicobar Islands in 2013. Welcome to the Fifth Paradigm, sir. It is indeed an honor to have you here with us.
It is indeed an honor to have you here with us, sir. So as you know, our topic for today's episode is an analysis of the two-front threat to India emanating in the north with Pakistan on one side and China on the other. My first question to you right off the bat is, considering the current circumstances and build-ups along the LAC in Ladakh and LOC in Kashmir, is there a possibility of a two-front war?
Well, firstly, I feel honored to have been invited by the JSIA Patriot Society to your fifth paradigm. And thanks to Archit and the co-host today, Madhav and Rishita. Madhav, am I audible? Absolutely?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Okay. So, your first question, if I was to repeat, was asking me about the possibility of a two-front challenge between China and Pakistan, and how do we deal with that? That is your first question. Let me say, the two-front challenge is no longer a dilemma. It's an existing reality for India. We ignore it at our own peril. For too long, we have lived in a romantic bubble, confident that our soft power and diplomacy will see us through tight situations. This has somewhat blinded us to hard realities of the unprecedented rise of China, almost ignoring the web that China has woven around us, especially its ominous relationship with Pakistan. Moreover, in recent times, our obsession with Pakistan and the proxy war that it is waging in Kashmir has almost blinded us to the threat now manifesting on our northern borders, and we know what we are facing there today. We have failed to realize that we are now dealing with not a rising, but a risen superpower called China. And they have arrived on the world stage. They are now ready to stare down the USA. So certainly they will pose a challenge to us. Moreover, China is rooted in great strategic cunning. Its military zoom is indeed formidable at all levels, especially the great advances they have made in technology. For both China and Pakistan, the end is important, the means are not, the ways are not. They will therefore use all the means to corner India and pose a challenge to us alone, as also in military cahoots with each other. Both China and Pakistan's quest for territory at India's expense is resolute and unending. Our short-term vested focus cannot be the basis of dealing with this challenge. It is incredulous how we have almost decided that we won't have to face a conflict, leave alone a two-front conflict. It's not that we are not prepared. Let me say that India today, the Indian armed forces, the Indian leadership, starting from a political leadership, the military leadership, strategic leadership, and then the operational leadership, is well prepared for any challenge we may face. The point I was trying to make was that when we look at our capabilities to meet such threats in the future, they take time to build up. And therefore, I think it is high time that India realizes this challenge and puts in the money that is required to build up not the minimum capabilities which we may already have, but the optimum capabilities that we would require. Let me just say, force has always been the last resort since time immemorial. As President Roosevelt said in his memoirs, speak softly but carry a big stick. We cannot afford to do the opposite. We have to be strong, period. That's the overall strategy that India needs to pursue, for only the brave and the strong will be able to survive. I hope that's a reasonable opener and you can go ahead now.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Thank you so much for that explanation that you've given, sir. And sir, emanating from this very question, you spoke of how India must be aware of its threats and must be ready to counter them at any point of time. Now, sir, in the recent times, we have seen that the Chinese and the Pakistani governments and their ties have grown stronger and stronger, be it in the form of increased Chinese investments into Pakistan, in the form of the CPEC, that is a China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or probably giving them the 4 new frigates that they are getting for the Pakistan Navy from the Chinese, or even PLA trying to encourage ISI to further infiltrate terrorists into the Kashmir Valley. Now, sir, on the same point, do you feel that this particular partnership of China and Pakistan that is being projected to the world as an unbreakable one will be sustainable for a long time? Or will China use Pakistan as another use-away object and throw them away to the side?
Yeah. To understand this China-Pak relationship, let's step back a little into history. Till the end of the Cold War, or just prior to that, Pakistan was firmly aligned to the United States and the Western Bloc, also joining alliances like CENTO and SEATO, and was a partner in the war on terror. But slowly, Pakistan got disillusioned when the United States and the Western allies did not side with it in the Indo-Pak disputes, and therefore decided to join the anti-India China camp. It assured benefits to both. For China, it was a good way to tie down India to the subcontinent and prevent it from becoming a challenger or competitor to China in Asia or on the world stage. For Pakistan, it brought some immediate benefits, especially in its nuclear program, as also a flow of defense equipment at reasonable rates. This Sino-Pak nexus has taken now more vigorous shape. Pakistan has leased a port, Gwadar, to China, in addition to a number of commercial projects that have been given to Chinese companies. Bulk of Pakistan's equipment, which earlier was Western based, is today ex-China origin and is on very easy terms. The CPEC corridor runs through Gilgit-Baltistan, connecting Karakoram to Gwadar, is one of China's most ambitious Belt and Road initiatives. They have also announced a very, very ambitious project to build a dam, one of the biggest dams in Gilgit-Baltistan, costing a whopping US dollar 5.83 billion. India has, of course, objected to this, since all these activities are being done in an area which India claims to be its own. And that was one of the primary reasons that India did not join the BRI initiative of China. There are other instances also of China-Pak collusion in the United Nations, when China has stepped forward to even prevent the banning, or there was a resolution to declare Masood Azhar as a terrorist, and China actually vetoed it. So as of now, this relationship between China and Pakistan seems to be a mutually beneficial one, but obviously we know that in the long term, the country that will pay the price for this relationship will be Pakistan. They are getting mired into more and more debt. They are getting mired into more and more Chinese footprint in their society. And I think that doesn't bode well for Pakistan. Presently, there are only feeble voices within Pakistan which are recognizing it and articulating it. But the military is firmly with the Chinese. And in Pakistan, it's the Pakistan army that calls the shots. But sooner than later, Pakistan will realize that this relationship with China is coming at a severe cost to Pakistan. But for the moment, they are hand in glove and in military cahoots with each other.
Thank you for your enlightening answer, sir.
Go ahead.
My
You'll
next
have to speak slightly louder. Slightly louder.
Thank you for your enlightening answer, sir.
No, you're not audible.
Am I audible now, sir?
No, you're not audible with your earphones. You could remove them and come direct onto your. Yeah, there's something. Okay.
Am I audible now, sir?
You are audible.
Thank you for your enlightening answer, sir. Sir, so my next question to you is, do you feel that things have improved in Kashmir Valley in the past 1.5 years? That is after the Balakot airstrikes and the abrogation of Article 370 and 335A. Have these things had an impact or acted as a deterrent on the Pakistan deep state's attempts to destabilize the region in any way?
Well, again, I think since it's for your students, let me again step back a little to the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, when Pakistan decided to wage this proxy war in Kashmir. And it's been on for the last 30 years, ebbing and subsiding. In all this time, let me state quite firmly that as far as the security situation is concerned, the Indian Army has been very capable in keeping it under control. And we have brought it to a stage where other instruments of the state, i.e. the political, economic, technological, social, they should have stepped forward to resolve the issue. The issue has one dimension of security, which I'm very confident that the Indian security forces led by the Indian Army are very, very capable of handling. But then there is the rest of the dimension of getting the people of Kashmir to understand. I don't know why they have not understood. It's not that the government has not tried, but I think we have to make more efforts. Finally, there are people, of course, some of them are misguided, and some of them are in cahoots with Pakistan. Let me say it was a game-changing event when India on 5th August 2019 made some very, very significant decisions. One was abrogations of the special treaties or holding them in abeyance, and then carving out Jammu and Kashmir as one union territory and Ladakh as a separate unit. And it's been now more than 1 year. As far as the security situation is concerned, it's again under control. But I think we have to make more efforts on the political side, on the social side, and address the psyche of the Kashmiris. The psyche of the Kashmiris feels hurt. Whether it is justified or not is a different point. But we have to make more efforts. Now, as far as Pakistan is concerned, let me state that if you all remember, in 2019, February, there was this massive suicide attack at Pulwama. 40 of CRPF Jawans died in that suicide attack. And India gave Pakistan a chance to accept the involvement of various groups in Pakistan, but Pakistan was in denial. And therefore, India had no option but to undertake a strike, an airstrike at Balakot. A lot of people have talked of number of casualties at Balakot, number of terrorists killed. In my view, that's not significant. What is significant, or what was significant, was that India put Pakistan on notice. The government of India owned up to the strike and conveyed to Pakistan. If you remember, the Balakot strike was not in POK. It was in actual Pakistan, well beyond POK, almost 80-100 kilometers from the line of control. And therefore, India put Pakistan on notice to say that hereafter there will be heavy costs to any misadventure by Pakistan in Indian territory or against Indian citizens. I think that message seems to have gone home. Though Pakistan has not, let's say, stopped its support to the proxy war and the terrorists and jihadis who are coming in, but they are now mindful that India has a threshold and you cannot push India's patience too far. And therefore, in my view, while you will see small scale events, insurgents, terrorists happening, and the Indian Army is well on top of the situation. Number of terrorists killed. In fact, the life of a terrorist can be measured in months, not years. So anybody who picks up a gun against the Indian state, within months, he is gone. So I think as far as the security situation is concerned, the Indian Armed Forces, it's led by the Indian Army, J&K Police, the Central Police Forces, will continue to keep the situation under control. And I'm sure the government of India will take initiatives to resolve this issue and move forward on the path where the alienation of the Kashmiris, justified or not, is reduced. And they realize that their well-being and their good health lies to be firmly with the Indian state.
So now moving on, of the Army and the Air Force and their role in the northern sector of the country in countering our two adversaries. But now, sir, with your particular experience in the armed forces, as well as having served in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, what do you feel is the role of the Indian Navy down south in countering our adversaries? Because there is always a debate about the real battlefield being in the north. But in my personal opinion, I feel that the south and the seas are equally crucial in countering our two. What do you have to say on that?
Madhav, India has, since time immemorial, had a land focus. All the invaders came through the land route. Even now, we have two adversaries, one on the west, one on the east, north, and east, and we have border disputes with both of them. The border is not fully demarcated. And you are seeing a manifestation of that. The Pakistan border is normally quite live on the line of control, and now you can see the manifestation of that in Chinese aggressive actions, and we are confronting them in Ladakh. So it is but natural that the focus has been on the land and therefore on the Army and Air Force. The two instruments which have a bearing on land warfare. But modern warfare and the battle paradigm has changed quite significantly. And today, the Navy was always important for a lot of other nations, but the Navy is becoming more and more important to even India today. The Indian Ocean and the trade routes, the sea lanes of communication which pass through the Indian Ocean and pass through the choke point of Malacca Strait, carry almost 60% of the world's trade, carry almost 80% of the trade and oil of China. And therefore, keeping in view that Indo-Pacific has become a very significant region with the United States, Russia, all other countries getting involved and interested, I think the Indian Navy will have to play its part. It's not to say that the Indian Navy is not significant. The Indian Navy is quite a significant blue ocean force. It can operate right from the Arabian Sea to the Malacca Straits very strongly. And if you have read, we even have a ship at the present moment in the China Sea. So the Indian Navy is quite significantly strong. Of course, there is always scope for improving them. But the problem that India faces is one of money. The defense budget is not infinite. The defense budget is finite, and therefore it has to be distributed as per the capabilities that we need to build up. Give you an example. While the smaller procurements are easily taken care of, the larger procurements are debated quite strongly. For example, the Air Force ordering the Rafale from France is going to cost a whopping lot. They want more aircraft. Similarly, the Indian Navy has two aircraft carriers. Now they want a third aircraft carrier. You know how much the third aircraft carrier is going to cost? Probably the complete capital budget of the Indian Armed Forces for 1 year. Of course, the payment will be spread over many years, but it's a whopping amount. So if you decide to pick up one, then it will be at the expense of something else. And therefore, the Chief of Defence Staff, General Bipin Rawat, has been chartered to look at inter-services prioritization. Intra-services prioritization will be done by the respective chiefs, but beyond that, when the three services present their wish list, I think it is the job of the Chief of Defence Staff to advise the Ministry of Defence on the prioritization of procurement between the three services. So that's how I would look at it.
Thank you for your answer, sir. Sir, historically, we've seen that Russia has always sided with India, no matter what the problem might be, and especially when our relations with US were very sour. However, today we can see a changing dynamic. Pakistan and China being hand in glove with each other, and Russia remaining silent on Chinese provocations in India. At the same time, we see the Quad with US, India, Japan, and Australia becoming active in order to China. With all of these developments, do you feel that it's now time for India to align itself with the Western Bloc?
Yeah. No, no, firstly, both Madhav and Rishita, your questions are not coming out clear. So later, when you edit the program, you can redo that. Okay, so that the audience can hear it clearly. As I understand, your question now is that Russia has been a traditional supporter of India, and bulk of our arms and equipment are of Russian origin. And in the 1971 operations, it was the 20 years security pact with Russia which gave us the confidence to go ahead, unmindful of China. That time, if you recollect, even the United States was opposing India and more in favor of Pakistan. India has followed a policy of non-alignment, and after the end of the Cold War, I think India's policy, if I could say, could be omni-alignment, not aligned with anybody in particular, but aligned as per our interests. And Russia has certainly been at the forefront of India's interests. They have been mindful of our interests. Of course, in the current situation, a lot of people are feeling that Russia has not been as vocal in supporting India as probably the United States or somebody else. Well, let me put it this way, that finally India has to take care of itself. Though the support of friends and other nations, which small is important, to that extent, Russia is in a peculiar situation because it has, for many reasons, become quite close to China. After the demise of the Soviet Union, when Russia was going through the initial pangs, I think the Western Bloc was not as magnanimous as they could have been, and therefore almost pushed Russia into the willing arms of China. And today, Russia and China have a very mutually beneficial, strong relationship. And therefore, it is understandable that in the present context, Russia has not taken sides. But please remember that our Raksha Mantri has been there 2-3 times. We have asked Russia to speed up the procurement of arms and ammunition, especially the S-400 air defense weapon systems, and Russia has done that. They've been very forthcoming to our requirements, and I would say that India would continue to count on Russia as a very reliable partner. Now, coming to the United States, the relationship with United States is multifaceted. People-to-people relationship, commercial relationship, technological relationship in the IT field, where IT people from India have virtually taken over the Silicon Valley. And now, the interests of both USA and India vis-a-vis China seem to be coinciding somewhat. And therefore, it is but natural for both the countries to consult each other and to support each other. And then you have the Quad. The Quad is a grouping of USA, Japan, Australia, and India. Well, it is not an anti-China bloc, but that is how it is a bloc to look at Indo-Pacific and the peaceful existence in Indo-Pacific. But the Chinese view it as almost anti-China bloc. So India is a very important partner in that. And as India-China relations go from bad to worse, the importance of this bloc will continue to rise. Having said that, let me also say that India is not ready to go into any camp or align with any alliance as of now. India is very, very, let's say, comfortable with maintaining strategic autonomy of its decision making. But yes, temporary groupings, etc., like the Quad, could be a way to the future.
Thank you for your answer, sir. Sir, my next question is that recently General Bipin Rawat made a statement about having military options on the table to deal with China. Along the same line, sir, I would like to ask you, how prepared do you feel we are militarily to counter both our enemies, if at all the tensions on both sides of the border do increase in the future?
Firstly, the statement by General Bipin Rawat that India has military options is a statement of fact. So far, India has dealt with the Chinese aggression or intrusion through military talks, through diplomatic talks, and through military confrontation. We have confronted them in areas where they have crossed over to the across the claim line. But both the military and the diplomatic talks have not been making much progress. And therefore, I think it would be naive not to expect India to also look at its military options, not by way of initiating a conflict, but if China can come and occupy areas on our side of the LAC, why can't India go and occupy some areas which we consider essential for our defense? And which, like you have seen in the recent case, the Chinese tried to occupy those peaks and areas which were on the line of actual control. And it was with great alacrity that the Indian army actually went ahead, rebuffed the Chinese maneuvers, and occupied those key posts. The Chinese have been cribbing and appealing that, asking India to withdraw. But India's let me say, terms are very clear. India says that we have never been the aggressor. We have always wanted to live in peace and tranquility. It's China that has broken all the agreements and all the trust between the two countries and come into our areas, not in one area, two areas, but multiple areas. And what India wants is that China should restore the status quo ante as existed in April 2020. And there should be no problem thereafter. And I think both the countries can then look at the future. But to expect India to behave normally on the economic and other fronts while China is carrying out aggressive intrusions across the line of actual control is not on. Your second part of this question related to, is India prepared to stand up to China and also Pakistan? As I've already seen, Pakistan was given a nice tight slap with Balakot. We have troops deployed on the Indo-Pak border, and if Pakistan dares to do any mischief or aggressive intent there, they will get a good rebuff. The Indian army is fully capable of upholding the integrity there. As far as China is concerned, you have also seen that initially we got slightly surprised because we trusted China. You know, we thought that China and India were looking at cooperation, but China's cunningness was not envisaged. But now that the Chinese have shown their real hand, the Indian army has mobilized, we have moved troops there, and we are confronting them in those areas. You saw Galwan. While the Chinese did act in a surreptitious manner and we lost 20 people, but all news suggests that Chinese lost much more. So therefore, in any face-off and conflict, which could follow, not necessarily, hopefully it should not follow, because conflicts in the 21st century can be very, very dangerous. There is too much of fire and other capabilities that are available. So let me state quite equivocally that as far as my view, India is already standing to China in a face-off, and even if there is a limited conflict, we will give China as good as we get. This is not the Indian Army of 1962. Having said that, let me also state that we need to build our capabilities to become stronger, because it's the strength that is recognized by the university. The Chinese recognize strength, and therefore there are areas where we need to put more effort and more money to enhance our capabilities, and I think that process is already on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Now, sir, you spoke of how India needs to enhance its capabilities. From that very question, I have a follow-up question for you, sir. That is, even if the current conflicts on either sides of the border do end, we don't have any guarantee that either of our adversaries will not provoke us in the future. Now, considering that, and even even the debates around the entire military modernization program that is going on in the country, which we saw recently with the acquisition of the Rafales, or the deal signing of the 6 lakh AK-203 rifles for the Indian Army. So considering that, apart from that, there has also been a debate that the Indian Air Force has a mandated 40 to 42 squadrons which need to be operating. Yet today we are operating down at about 30, 32 squadrons. So then we also have a requirement for lightweight tanks for the Indian Army, which can operate in a much better manner as compared to the heavy tanks in the higher altitude regions. So considering all of these requirements that the tri-services have today, what do you feel should be the outlook of the Indian government for the next 10 years? And how do you feel that these shortcomings should be fulfilled for the three forces?
That's a very lengthy question. And to get your full answer on this question, I hope some of you had joined my elective subject like Archit has done. And maybe at the end of it, Archit will be able to answer. But let me answer this question. The procurement process of the Indian Armed Forces is a very institutionalized process. So all the three services make their long-term perspective plan, which is a 15-year plan, out of which they derive their 5-year plans and the full plans. These three plans are meshed at Headquarter Integrated Defense Staff, and they make what is called a long-term integrated perspective plan. Now that plan requires the approval of the Ministry of Defense, and today the CDS, as I mentioned, has been chartered to look at the inter-service priority based on the money that is likely to be available. On the revenue side, we get the money that we require, but on the capital, there is always a shortfall. Our budget, if you recollect, has now reduced to almost 1.5 to 1.6% of the GDP. People were clamoring for 3%, but in my view, at least a 2 to 2.25% of our GDP budget is required to support our march into the future. After all, India is today a rising power, and there are obligations and expectations. And we have to find our rightful place on the high table, apart from other commitments of the government, which we all understand, socio-economic commitments. Defense will have to be given what we require. At least the minimum amount will have to be given. Now coming to see, when you have a confrontation, I am not of the opinion that when you are in a face-off, you draw up a list and run to buy those items. Why should we do that? In any case, no item is available. It's not a shop where you go and pick up the item. Even if you fast-track the procedure, it will take maybe a couple of years for it to come. But yes, what happens is, such events do highlight the voids that you have. And therefore, it becomes easier for the decision makers to focus on those voids. And in my view, those voids generally, as far as India is concerned, could be apart from what is the normal procurement process. As far as the army is concerned, you have to focus on your ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. We have to focus on high technology, that means satellite, cyber, and bringing that capability down to the tactical level, to the tactical commander. We have to focus on attack helicopters. We have to focus on drones and UAVs, unarmed aerial vehicles, both unarmed and armed. And we have to also focus on long-range precision fire. And there are many other small items. I'm sure the army is already looking at it. Most of these were already part of the long-term integrated perspective plan of the army, but some of them will now get precedence over the others. As far as the light tank is concerned, well, there is a requirement that was established long back, not just for Ladakh. We are a huge army, we are a large nation, and we require some light tanks. I won't talk of the exact numbers here, but there is no emergency to procure light tanks for Ladakh. Though the Chinese have light tanks, against them we have a very formidable tank, the T-90 tank. And I've gone to Ladakh, I've interacted with the tankmen there, spent time with them, talked to them. And I think they are very confident that they will be able to take on any enemy threat that emanates from the other side. Now coming to the Air Force. You said that the Air Force, it's common knowledge in the open also that India's strength in the Air Force has been going down. And from what was desired, 40 plus, 42, 44, is probably in the between 30, around 30, 32, 33. I'm not aware of the exact strength down today. Plus, some of the aircraft are vintage, like the MiG-21s and all, have actually outlived their useful life. Though they are still, you saw post Balakot, Wing Commander Abhinandan was actually flying a MiG-21, which we shot down a F-16 with that. So certainly there is a need to build up air power. And towards that end, you saw the Rafale order is now fructifying. The first 5 Rafales have already arrived and the balance will keep coming. But how many aircraft do we require? How many squadrons do we require is a question that is going to be debated. For the simple reason, when we talked of 40 plus 42 squadrons, it was of a particular capability. Today, the capability of aircraft has enhanced manifold. And we are talking of 4th generation plus moving on to 5th generation aircraft. In addition, we are also looking at UAVs to complement the aircraft. We are also looking at a very strong air defense. The S-400 that is on order is not only a very capable air defense system, it's also a very costly air defense system. So I think keeping in view all this, how many squadrons we finally settle at is for the Indian Air Force, the Chief of Defence Staff and the Ministry of Defence to decide. But they will come to a pragmatic figure that is required. Already, I think apart from the Rafale, the Tejas Indian version aircraft of HAL is already starting to get inducted, and there's a huge order that will follow. As far as the Navy is concerned, we have 2 aircraft carriers. The Navy is obviously bidding for a 3rd aircraft carrier. But as I told you, the 3rd aircraft carrier is going to cost a lot. And if we go in for that, it will be at the expense of the Army and the Air Force. We'll have to shed some aircraft and some capabilities of the Army. Also, there is a huge debate that is on. Do we need aircraft carriers, or do we go in for a combination of submarines and long-range aircraft? Today, with air-to-air refueling, you don't need to take an aircraft carrier next to the coast to use that. Because mind you, when an aircraft carrier moves, it requires a large number of ships for its own protection. And therefore, today with mid-air refueling, aircraft based on the land, can reach out to most of the spots that we want to reach out to. And therefore, I think this debate is still not settled. Even in the Navy, there are two viewpoints, that there is maybe instead of a third aircraft carrier, we could invest in other ships and submarines and long range maritime and other aircraft. So I think one thing is clear, that the government of India will now have to enhance the defense capital procurement budget, because the voids are quite clear. And we have also, as I mentioned in the against the first question, we have come to a clear realization that diplomacy and soft power has severe limitations. They can only function on a fulcrum that is provided by hard power. And therefore, India has no choice but to scale up now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing all your views on these very pressing issues, if I must say, especially in today's scenario where on both the sides. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you for joining us. And we really hope to have you on our future episodes of the Fifth Paradigm as well.
Thank you. Thank you to Archit, to you and to Rishita. So thank you very much.